I need a wife, and you need a home. That's what a lonely mountain man declared to a poor Amish girl at the train depot. In front of the whole town, he offered her something no one else would shelter. But when she stepped into his cabin, she didn't just find 4 log walls and a fire. A starving boy was hiding inside, and a county agent was already circling with papers to steal the land beneath their feet. Now, whispers in church turn to threats in the street, and soldiers march with orders to tear this fragile family apart. Yet in the darkest moment, one truth rises. Vows written in faith may be the only weapon stronger than the law. Will a stranger's bold declaration truly build a home? More will greed and lies burn it all to ash. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The autumn wind whistled through the Colorado Rail Depot, sending dust devils dancing across weathered wooden planks. Manuel McCord shifted his weight against a rough timber post, his keen eyes scanning the crowd that spilled from the newly arrived train. Steam hissed from the locomotive's belly, mixing with the earthy scent of horses and leather that filled the air. Among the bustling merchants in their fine coats and drovers in dusty chaps, one figure caught Manuel's attention. A young woman in plain dress stood alone, her black bonnet marking her as Amish. Her clothes, though clean and carefully mended, showed signs of long wear. She carried no carpet bag, though she tried to hide it. Manuel watched as she approached different townspeople, her voice barely carrying above the depot's clamor. "Excuse me, have you heard of the Yoder family? They were to meet me here." Each person she asked either shook their head or turned away, too busy with their own concerns. The woman's composure began to crack, desperation creeping into her eyes like shadows lengthening at dusk. Manuel straightened, his weathered hands gripping his belt. He'd lived alone in his mountain cabin since Sarah passed, finding comfort in solitude and hard work. But something about this lost soul stirred memories of his own darker days. When kindness had been scarce as water in August, the woman, he'd heard someone call her Rhea, approached the station master. "Sir, might I wait here? Perhaps they're delayed." The station master barely glanced up from his ledger. "Station closes at sundown. Miss, can't have people loitering about?" Manuel felt the weight of decisions settle in his chest, heavy as river stones. Before he could second-guess himself, his boots carried him forward through the crowd. The wooden planks creaked beneath his steady stride as he approached Rhea. She turned at his approach, eyes widening slightly at his imposing figure. Manuel knew how he must look tall and broad-shouldered, with a beard gone wild and clothes that spoke of mountain living. But he kept his voice gentle, though rough from disuse. "Ma'am," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "I need a wife, and you need a home." The depot fell quiet as a church mouse. A woman in a fine purple dress gasped. The station master's pen stopped scratching. All eyes turned to the unlikely pair, the mountain man and the Amish girl. Rhea's face went still as pond water. Manuel could see her mind working, weighing impossible choices. She studied him with eyes the color of autumn wheat. Searching for something, threat or salvation, he wasn't sure. The silence stretched thin as spider silk. Then, barely above a whisper, she spoke. "I have nowhere else." More gasps rippled through the crowd. The station master's wife clutched her husband's arm, whispering furiously. A group of young men near the water barrel stopped their talk to stare. "My wagon's this way." Rhea took it, her small hand light as a bird on his sleeve. Together they walked away from the depot, leaving a wake of wagging tongues behind them. Manuel helped her into his wagon, careful to keep proper distance, as they pulled away from town. The sun began its slow slide behind the mountains. Long shadows stretched across the rutted road, and the first evening star winked to life in the darkening sky. The wagon wheels creaked a steady rhythm as Manuel's horses plodded toward home. Rhea sat straight and silent beside him, her hands folded in her lap. The bundle that held all her worldly possessions rested at her feet. Though she faced forward, Manuel caught her stealing glances at the wild country around them, the towering pines. The distant peaks still touched with last winter's snow, the vast emptiness that had been his only companion these past years. The cooling air carried the scent of sage and pine, so different from the farmlands she must know. As darkness crept closer, coyotes began their evening songs, their yips echoing off distant cliffs. Rhea startled at the sound, but didn't speak. Manuel cleared his throat. "It's a fair piece to the cabin, yet Best wrap up in that blanket behind you? Night gets cold in these parts. She reached back for the wool blanket, drawing it around her shoulders with quiet grace. "Thank you," she murmured. The first words she'd spoken since leaving the depot, they continued on as evening settled fully around them. To strangers bound together by necessity and chance, rolling toward an uncertain future in the gathering dark. Manuel guided the horses along the rutted track leading away from town, their hooves striking a steady rhythm against the hard-packed earth. The wagon swayed and creaked beneath them as wooden wheels found every dip and stone. Behind them, the sun painted the sky in deep oranges and purples, casting long shadows across the valley. Rhea sat straight-backed beside him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes tracked upward to the towering peaks that crowned the horizon, their jagged tops already dusted with early snow. The sight seemed to draw something from her, a quiet gasp of wonder that she quickly contained. "Those mountains," she ventured softly. "They reach right up to heaven." Manuel gave a low grunt of acknowledgement. "Reckon they do. Been my home these past 8 years. He paused, then added, "Since Sarah passed." Rhea's hands tightened slightly in her lap. "Your wife?" she asked, her voice careful and measured. "Yes." Manuel kept his eyes on the road. Fever took her. Winter of 70. Nothing to be done about it. Silence settled between them again, broken only by the wagon's continuous creak and the gentle snort of horses. After a while, Rhea spoke again. "You have lived alone since then, mostly? Trading post sees me every few months. Otherwise, just me in the mountains." He glanced her way. "Some folks can't abide the quiet, but it suits me well enough." Rhea nodded, considering this. "We had quiet on our farm in Pennsylvania. Different quiet, perhaps. But I understand the peace in it." The sun dipped lower, and the air grew sharp with evening chill. Manuel watched how Rhea drew the blanket closer, though she made no complaint. Her quiet dignity stirred something in him. Respect, maybe, or recognition of a strength that ran deeper than first glance would tell. When they reached Crystal Creek, Manuel pulled the wagon to a stop. "Need to water the horses," he explained, "and we'll rest here till morning." No sense pushing on in the dark. He helped her down from the wagon, noting how she moved with careful grace despite her weariness. While he tended to the horses, Rhea stood at the creek's edge, watching the water tumble over rocks worn smooth by time. Manuel gathered dry wood and soon had a small fire crackling. From his saddlebag, he pulled out jerky and a half loaf of bread. "It ain't much," he offered, holding out a portion to Rhea, "but it'll keep body and soul together." Rhea accepted the food with a quiet "thank you" before taking a bite. She bowed her head, lips moving in silent prayer. Manuel watched, something tight easing in his chest. It had been years since anyone had prayed over food at his fire. The awkward tension that had rode with them began to soften as they ate in companionable silence. The fire popped and sparked, sending bright motes dancing upward to join the emerging stars. An owl called from somewhere in the darkness, its voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Your cabin," Rhea said finally. "Is it very far?" "Another day's travel," Manuel replied. "Road gets narrower from here. Steeper, too." He hesitated, then added, "It ain't much to look at. Just logs and labor. But it's solid enough." Rhea nodded, her face thoughtful in the firelight. "A home needs not be grand to be blessed," she said softly. "Only honest." Manuel felt the weight of those words settle around him like an old familiar coat. They spoke little after that, each lost in their own thoughts as the fire burned low. He showed her how to make a bed from the wagon's blankets, then took his place on the other side of the fire, his rifle close at hand. The fire, his rifle close at hand. Morning came with frost silvering the grass and their breath showing white in the dawn air. They ate a cold breakfast, and Rhea prayed again, her voice a whisper in the stillness. As Manuel hitched the horses, he noticed how she helped without being asked, rolling blankets and tidying their small camp with efficient movements. The road, as promised, grew narrower as they climbed higher into the mountains. The wagon wheels found every rut and root, making the journey slow and jarring. Yet Rhea remained steady beside him, accepting each bump without complaint. Manuel found himself stealing glances at his unlikely companion, wondering at the turn of fate that had brought them here. He could see questions in her eyes, too, when she thought he wasn't looking, wondering, perhaps. If this desperate arrangement could truly become something more than mere necessity, The morning wore on, the sun climbing higher as they made their way deeper into the mountains, each mile bringing them closer to what would become their shared future. For better or worse, the mountain path finally opened onto a small clearing where Manuel's cabin stood against the tree line. The rough-hewn logs showed weather-worn gray, but the walls stood straight and true. Smoke-blackened stones circled a long cold fire pit out front, and split firewood lay stacked beneath the eaves. "Here we are," Manuel said, helping Rhea down from the wagon. She stood for a moment, taking in the remote homestead with its backdrop of towering pines and distant peaks. Manuel led the way to the cabin's heavy wooden door, its hinges groaning as he shouldered it open. Dust motes danced in the shaft of morning light that spilled across the plank floor. "Ain't much," he muttered, "but it keeps out the weather." Rhea stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim interior. A stone hearth dominated one wall, cold ashes in its belly. A crude bedstead sat in one corner, draped with wool blankets. Rough shelves lined with tools, traps, and supplies stretched along another wall. A table fashioned from split logs stood beneath the room's single window. "The chest there holds supplies," Manuel explained, pointing. "And theirs," he broke off at a faint scuffling sound from the corner. Rhea froze. What was that? Manuel's hand moved to his belt knife as he crossed to the bedstead. In one swift motion, he yanked back the hanging blanket. A sharp gasp came from beneath the bed frame. "Come out," Manuel ordered, his voice hard. Now, slowly, a thin figure emerged from the shadows. It was a boy, no more than 12, with sharp features and frightened eyes. His clothes hung in tatters, and dark bruises marked his arms. "Please," the boy whispered, pressing himself against the wall. "Don't send me back." "Back where?" Manuel demanded. "Who are you?" "Eli," the boy stammered. From Mr. Graves's smithy in town, his eyes darted between Manuel and Rhea. "I ran away 3 days ago." Rhea made a soft sound of dismay. Without hesitation, she reached into her shawl and pulled out the remainder of their travel bread. "Here," she said gently, kneeling to offer it to him. "You must be hungry." Eli stared at the bread, then at Rhea's face, as if searching for some trick. His hand darted out, snatching the food before retreating back to his corner. Manuel's jaw tightened. "Boy needs to go back to town," he said gruffly. "Can't keep a runaway." "No." Eli's voice cracked with fear. "Please, I'll work hard. I can help with anything, chores, hunting, whatever you need." Rhea's voice was quiet but firm. She stood and faced him, her eyes steady. No child should freeze in the wilderness or suffer such cruelty. She gestured to the boy's bruises. "Would you truly send him back to that?" Manuel ran a hand over his beard, conflict plain on his weathered face. The boy had broken into his home, yet there was something in those frightened eyes that tugged at memories of his own hard. "Youth ain't got room for strays," he muttered, but with less conviction. "There is always room for mercy." Rhea replied softly. Eli watched this exchange with desperate hope, crumbs still clinging to his fingers. He had pressed himself so tightly into the corner that he seemed to be trying to become part of the wall itself. Finally, Manuel's shoulders sagged. "Reckon you can stay the night," he said gruffly. "We'll figure the rest tomorrow." Relief flooded the boy's thin face. "Thank you, sir." "Thank you, ma'am." As the day waned into evening, the cabin slowly came to life. Rhea swept the floor with a rough broom while Manuel built up the hearth fire. Eli, gradually emerging from his fearful shell, fetched water from the creek at Rhea's gentle request. The room filled with the smell of cooking as Rhea prepared a simple meal from Manuel's stores. She set out tin plates on the plank table, and Manuel found himself watching as she ladled out portions with careful fairness. They gathered around the table, an unlikely trio. Eli perched on an upturned crate, his eyes still darting occasionally toward the door, as if expecting his former master to appear. But as the warm food filled his belly, some of the haunted look began to fade from his face. The firelight cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls as they ate. Through the window, stars began to prick through the darkening sky. Manuel watched as Rhea showed Eli how to sop up the last of his stew with a piece of bread, her movements gentle and patient. Something shifted in the air of the cabin that night, something that made the rough-hewn walls feel less like mere shelter and more like the beginnings of a home. Dawn brought a crisp mountain morning. the sun barely clearing the eastern peaks when hoofbeats echoed up the trail. Manuel paused in splitting wood, while Rhea looked up from where she swept the cabin's front step. A well-dressed man on a gleaming bay horse emerged from the tree line, his polished boots and pressed suit marking him as a town official. Mr. McCord, the rider's voice carried smooth as creek water over stones. Clive Hartwell, county land and railroad agent, he dismounted with practiced grace, pulling papers from his leather satchel. Need to discuss your claim situation. Manuel set down his axe, wiping rough hands on his pants. Claim's been filed proper. 5 years I've worked this land. Indeed, Hartwell's smile didn't reach his eyes as he unfolded several documents. However, there are concerns. Railroad interests are surveying possible routes through this valley. Your claim's legitimacy requires proof of proper settlement, including a family household. His gaze slid to Rhea, taking in her plain dress and prayer cap with obvious skepticism. I understand you've recently acquired a wife. Manuel's shoulders tensed at the man's tone. Before he could respond, Rhea stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. I am Rhea Manuel and I were married 2 days past. How convenient. Hartwell's words dripped with doubt, and this arrangement was properly witnessed and recorded. We aim to register at the county office next market day, Manuel growled. Moving closer to Rhea, Hartwell tucked the papers away with deliberate care. Well, the Railroad Commission will be conducting inspections of all claims along the proposed route. We'll need to verify this is a genuine homestead, not merely a squatter's cabin. His eyes swept over the rough building. We'll be back to assess the situation. This is our home, Rhea said quietly, her hand finding Manuel's arm. You'll find everything in proper order. Hartwell mounted his horse with a slight bow that seemed more mockery than courtesy. We shall see, Mrs. McCord. We shall see. He turned his mount and rode away. Leaving dust settling in the morning air, Manuel waited until the rider disappeared before exploding. Railroad vultures. Been trying to steal land up and down this valley. He kicked at a chunk of wood, sending it spinning. Ain't enough. They got half the territory now. They want what honest folk built with. Their own hands, then we must show them what we've built, Rhea said firmly. She gazed at their cabin with determined eyes, a proper home with everything in its place. Manuel turned to argue, but something in her steady gaze stopped him. She was right, they needed to prove themselves a real family, not just people sharing space. Eli Rhea called to the boy, who had been watching wide-eyed from behind a woodpile. Would you fetch water from the creek? We've much cleaning to do. Yes, ma'am. He grabbed the wooden bucket and hurried down the path. Throughout the day, they worked to transform the cabin. Rhea found old curtains in a chest and mended their tiers, while Manuel repaired loose boards and a crooked shutter. Eli made countless trips for water, helped beat dust from blankets, and stacked firewood with careful precision. Inside, Rhea organized Manuel's scattered tools onto proper shelves. She swept years of dirt from corners and scrubbed the plank table until the wood gleamed. Manuel watched in amazement as his bachelor's cave slowly became an ordered home. When Eli discovered a patch of late wildflowers in a sunny clearing, Rhea arranged them in a tin cup on the table. The simple touch somehow made the whole cabin seem brighter. As evening approached, Manuel lit the oil lamp. Its warm glow revealed a transformed space. The bed had clean blankets, the hearth was neatly swept, and savory stew bubbled in the cookpot. Even the rough walls seemed less stark. Softened by Rhea's mended curtains, reckon that land agent won't recognize the place, Manuel admitted. Settling into his chair by the fire, it's not for him, Rhea said softly, stirring the stew. It's for us. A proper home needs proper care. Eli sat cross-legged by the hearth, whittling a stick with careful concentration. The boy had worked hard all day, his eagerness to help showing in every task. Now he looked more settled, less like a frightened rabbit ready to bolt. Manuel watched them both in the lamplight. Rhea's gentle movements as she prepared their meal, Eli's absorbed focus on his whittling. Something tight in his chest began to loosen. Maybe they could make this work. Maybe they could become the family they needed to be, not just for the railroad men, but for themselves. Outside, evening settled over the mountains, painting the peaks in purple shadow. Inside the cabin, lamplight glowed through clean windows, marking this small space of warmth, against the gathering dark. The mountain morning dawned crisp and bright as Manuel led Rhea to a sturdy oak near the cabin. He hefted his axe, demonstrating the proper stance. "Got to split with the grain," he explained, guiding her hands on the worn handle. "Let the weight do the work." Rhea's first swing barely scratched the log. Her second wobbled off course. But she persisted, her face set with quiet determination. By midday, neat splits of wood lay scattered around her feet, though her arms trembled from the effort. "You're learning quick," Manuel admitted, surprised by her tenacity. He showed her his trap line next, teaching her to read animal signs and set snares in likely spots. Though her fingers fumbled with the wire at first, she soon mastered the careful knots in turn. Rhea transformed their meager supplies through skills learned in her Amish community. She stretched their flour with careful measuring, making bread rise despite the cabin's temperamental heat. Her needle flew through torn clothes, adding neat patches that somehow looked meant to be there. Even Manuel's worn jacket received her attention, emerging stronger than before. Eli shadowed them both, soaking up every lesson. He learned to spot rabbit trails with Manuel and to knead dough beside Rhea. His quick hands proved skilled at both tasks, eager to contribute to their growing household. One evening, as autumn wind rattled the cabin walls, Rhea sat mending by lamplight. Her voice rose soft and clear in an old hymn. The German words flowing like water, "Gott ist die Liebe." Manuel froze at his workbench, memories flooding back. Sarah had sung too, before the fever took her. His chest tightened with familiar grief, and he pushed up from his chair, reaching for the door. Eli's small hand caught his sleeve. The boy's eyes pleaded in the lamplight. "Stay, please." Manuel hesitated, torn between escape and the need in that single word, "Pa." Behind them, Rhea's voice continued, weaving peace through the shadows. Slowly, Manuel sank back into his chair. Eli settled at his feet, leaning against his leg like a tired pup. The boy's presence anchored him, keeping him from fleeing into the dark. Manuel's hands gradually unclenched as Rhea's hymn filled the cabin with gentle warmth. Without conscious thought, Manuel's head bowed. He hadn't prayed since Sarah died, but something in Rhea's song opened a long-sealed door. Peace crept in like morning light through window frost, thawing places he'd thought forever frozen. "What does it mean?" Eli whispered when the song ended. The words, Rhea's hand stilled on her mending. "It means God is love," she translated softly, "and love brings us home." Manuel kept his head bowed, feeling Sarah's memory settle differently, no, not as a weight of grief, but as a blessing that had prepared him for this moment. This unlikely family, brought together by need, was slowly becoming something more. The lamp flickered low as Rhea began another hymn. This time, Manuel didn't fight the comfort it brought. Together they sat, the man, the woman, and the boy. While music filled the spaces between them with gentle light, outside early snow began to fall. But inside the cabin, warmth bloomed like spring. Manuel felt it in his bones. This was what home should feel like, not just shelter from storm, but shelter for the heart. Sunday morning painted the mountain peaks in soft gold as Manuel hitched the mule to their wagon. He tugged uncomfortably at his freshly mended collar, while Rhea settled onto the wooden seat. Her plain dress, neat despite its wear. Eli scrambled into the back, his face scrubbed clean for the occasion. "Ain't been to church since Sarah passed," Manuel muttered, gathering the reins. His knuckles whitened against the leather. Rhea smoothed her skirts. "The Lord welcomes all his children home," she said simply. Her quiet certainty made argument impossible. The wagon rattled down the mountain track, every rut and stone familiar to Manuel. But today the journey felt different, heavy with meaning he couldn't quite name. Eli bounced in the back, pointing out deer tracks and hawk circles, his chatter filling the morning air as they approached town. Manuel's shoulders tensed. The church bell tolled across the dusty street, calling folks to worship. He helped Rhea down from the wagon, conscious of every eye upon them. Whispers rippled through the gathering crowd like wind through prairie. "Grass. That's the mountain man," someone murmured, with that Amish girl he claimed at the depot, living in sin. "If you ask me," came another harsh whisper. Manuel's jaw tightened, but Rhea's presence beside him remained steady as a compass pointing true north. They climbed the wooden steps together, Eli close behind. The boy's hand slipped into Manuel's rough palm, offering unexpected comfort. Inside, sunlight streamed through simple windows, catching dust motes in golden beams. The preacher stood at his pulpit, weathered Bible open before him. His tired eyes brightened at the sight of them. "Welcome," he said, extending his hand. "God's house opens its doors to all who seek him." Manuel nodded stiffly, guiding his unlikely family to a back pew. The wooden bench felt foreign beneath him after so many years away. But Ria's quiet reverence as she bowed her head somehow made it easier to stay. The service began with familiar hymns that stirred long-buried memories. Manuel didn't sing, but he found himself swaying slightly as Ria's clear voice joined the congregation. Even Eli attempted to follow along, though he stumbled over the words. The preacher's sermon spoke of grace freely given, of mercy that sought the lost. Manuel tried not to feel those words, settling into his chest like warm bread after long hunger. But when Ria's hand found his during the final prayer, he didn't pull away. After the service, they stood in the churchyard as others filed past. Some nodded politely, though their eyes held questions. The preacher came to speak with them, asking after their welfare with genuine concern. But then, a sharp voice cut through the autumn air. Well, if it isn't the convenient couple, Mrs. Parsons, the mercantile owner's wife, stood with several other women, her face pinched with disapproval. "Tell me, girl, what kind of proper Amish maid weds a heathen stranger? Unless it's all for show, of course." Manuel's fists clenched at his sides. Heat rose in his throat as he stepped forward, but Ria's gentle grip on his arm held him back. Her touch was light as a feather, yet somehow stronger than iron. "I thank thee for thy concern," Ria answered, her voice calm as morning dew. "But my marriage is between myself, my husband, and God alone. Perhaps thy worry might better serve those truly in need of aid." The quiet dignity in her words seemed to take the wind from Mrs. Parsons' sails. The woman's mouth opened, then closed, and she turned away with a huff. The drive home felt lighter somehow. Mountain shadows lengthened across their path as the wagon climbed steadily upward. From his perch in the back, Eli watched Manuel and Ria sitting side by side on the wagon seat. "Not raising thy hand in anger," Manuel grunted. "Wanted to. Still don't see how letting folks talk that way helps anything. Violence breaks what dignity can mend," she explained. "Patience and grace will outlast any storm of words." Then added, like water wearing down stone, Manuel considered this. Remembering how her calm response had deflated Mrs. Parsons' spite more effectively than any punch could have, there was strength in such gentleness, a kind he'd never thought to value before. From the back of the wagon, Eli noticed something new in the way Manuel's eyes softened when they rested on Ria. The boy saw how his guardian's gruff manner gentled around her, like a rough trail smoothing into well-worn path. Their shoulders nearly touched on the narrow wagon seat, and neither seemed to mind. The mountain air turned sharper as autumn settled deeper into the valley. Each morning, frost painted the cabin's small window panes with delicate patterns that caught the early light. Manuel stood at the door, watching his breath cloud in the crisp dawn while pulling on his worn leather gloves. Behind him, the warm scents of coffee and cornbread drifted from where Ria worked at the crude stove. "Mind if I come along today?" Eli asked, his thin frame appearing at Manuel's elbow. The boy had filled out some since arriving, thanks to Ria's steady meals, but remained wiry as a young sapling. Manuel nodded. "Reckon it's time you learned the snare lines proper." He reached for his trap bag. Weathered leather creased from years of use. "Winter's coming? We'll need every rabbit we can get." They set out together, boots crunching through frost-stiffened grass. Manuel showed Eli how to spot the subtle signs of rabbit runs, the pressed-down vegetation, the scattered droppings, the places where they crossed between thickets. His rough hands guided the boy's smaller ones in setting snares, teaching him the careful twist of wire. "Like this?" Eli asked, tongue caught between his teeth in concentration as he worked. "That's the way," Manuel approved. "Keep it clean and simple. Animal won't suspect nothing that looks natural." They worked their way along the trap line, Manuel watching as Eli grew more confident with each set. The boy had quick hands and keen eyes, good traits for a trapper. Something warm and unfamiliar stirred in Manuel's chest as he watched Eli work, reminded of his own father teaching him these same skills so many years ago. Back at the cabin, Ria had been busy with her own preparations for the coming cold. The rough plank table held rows of glass jars, filled with preserved beans and late berries. She'd learned to supplement her Amish preserving knowledge with mountain ways. Drying strips of venison and wild herbs from the cabin's rafters, the cellars filling well, she said as they stamped inside, setting down her latest batch of jars. Though we'll need more meat before the snows. Eli's getting good with the snares, Manuel offered. Won't go hungry this winter. A small smile touched Rhea's lips as she watched them shed their coats. The cabin had changed since her arrival, still rough and simple, but with touches of care showing through. Patched curtains hung straight at the windows, the floor swept clean. Order emerging from bachelor chaos. The fire painted their faces in shifting gold as Rhea mended clothes and Manuel worked on a new trap wire. Eli sat cross-legged on the floor, whittling a piece of pine with careful strokes of the small knife Manuel had given him. Eli's voice came soft and hesitant. "Could you show me how to set that new trap tomorrow?" Manuel's hands stilled. The word hung in the air between them, fragile as frost. He felt its weight, remembering all the years he'd thought he'd never hear that name spoken to him. Slowly, he placed a heavy hand on Eli's thin shoulder. Feeling the boy's slight trembling, "Reckon I could," he managed finally, his voice rough. "Reckon I could at that." Eli leaned almost imperceptibly into the touch, his small shoulders relaxing. The fire popped and sparked, sending shadows dancing across the cabin walls. Rhea's needle moved steady and sure through her mending, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Later, after Eli had curled up in his bedroll near the hearth, Rhea moved to bank the fire for the night. Manuel stood at the window, watching darkness settle over the mountains. "Thank you," Rhea said quietly, coming to stand beside him, for letting him stay. For being kind to him, Manuel shifted, uncomfortable with the praise. Boy needed somewhere. Ain't nothing special about taking him in. It means everything to him, Rhea countered gently. And, she hesitated, then continued, "I think perhaps it means something to you as well." Manuel was silent for a long moment, watching the wind-stirred tree branches against the star-filled sky. "Been a long time since this cabin held anything but loneliness," he admitted finally. Forgot what it was like having others about, having purpose beyond just surviving. Rhea's hand touched his arm briefly, warm through his sleeve. "God works in mysterious ways," she murmured, bringing three lost souls together. The fire crackled low behind them, its warmth reaching out like gentle hands. Wind whispered around the cabin's solid walls, but inside, the space felt sheltered, protected. Manuel looked at Rhea's profile in the fading firelight, seeing the strength beneath her gentle ways, the faith that had carried her so far from all she'd known. A comfortable silence settled. Between them, as they stood there, watching night deepen over their mountain home, in the quiet, broken only by Eli's soft breathing and the whisper of wind, something new and tender took root, like the first green shoot breaking through winter soil. The weather turned without warning, as mountain seasons often do. One morning, Manuel woke to find the valley dusted white, snow settling like flour on the autumn-bare branches. The early cold snap painted frost patterns across the cabins, small window panes, and set the livestock huddling close in their rough shelter. Inside the cabin, Rhea counted their dwindling supplies with quiet concern. The flour barrel showed more wood than grain, and their salt pork stores had dwindled faster than expected, with 3 mouths to feed. She turned to Manuel, who stood checking his rifle near the door. "We'll need more before the real storms come," she said simply. Manuel nodded, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "Eli," he called, "fetch your coat. Time you learned to track deer." The boy scrambled up from where he'd been mending a pair of worn boots, eyes bright with excitement. His movements were quick but careful as he pulled on the patched coat Rhea had altered to fit. "Him, mind what Manuel teaches you?" Rhea said, pressing a small bundle of cornbread into Eli's hands. And stay warm, they set out into the crystalline morning, breath clouding in the sharp air. Manuel led them along game trails he knew well, teaching Eli to spot the subtle signs of deer passage, broken twigs, scattered droppings, bark rubbed smooth on young trees. The boy proved an attentive student, moving with natural quiet through the frosted underbrush. But as the sun began its early winter descent, Manuel's attention shifted. Something felt wrong. The forest had grown too quiet, the birds gone still. He gestured for Eli to stop, scanning the trees with narrowed eyes. "Best head back," he said finally. Lights failing and weather's turning, they returned to find fresh horse tracks in the new snow around the cabin. Manuel's hand tightened on his rifle as he saw lamplight through the windows. He motioned Eli to stay behind him as they approached. Inside, Clive Hartwell stood warming his hands by their hearth, a deputy at his shoulder. Rhea stood rigid near the table, her face pale but composed. Papers rustled in Hartwell's gloved hands as he turned to face them, a cold smile playing at his lips. "Just the man I came to see." Hartwell's smooth voice filled the cabin. "I have some matters requiring attention." Manuel's jaw tightened as he set his rifle aside. "Speak your piece and go, gladly." Hartwell drew out a document with flourish. "First, I have here a complaint from Matthew Turner, the blacksmith. Seems this boy is his legal apprentice, bound by contract. Turner wants his property returned." Eli pressed against Manuel's side, trembling. Manuel's hand found the boy's shoulder, steadying him. "Eli ain't property," he growled. "Turner beat him near to death." "The law sees differently." Hartwell produced another paper. "And speaking of law, I find no record of a marriage license between you and the woman. No formal recognition of your arrangement." Rhea stepped forward, her voice steady despite her pallor. "Our marriage is before God. God doesn't issue homestead rights," my dear. Hartwell's smile widened. "Without proof of a legal family settlement, this land reverts to railroad interest. Unless, of course, you'd care to make me a more reasonable offer." Manuel surged forward, but Rhea's hand caught his arm. The deputy's hand dropped to his gun belt. "You have 1 week to vacate," Hartwell continued, tucking the papers away. "I'll return with soldiers to enforce the order if needed. Good evening to you all," he swept out, the deputy following. The cabin door closed with terrible finality behind them. Manuel paced the cabin like a caged mountain lion, rage rolling off him in waves. Ain't no law that gives him right to steal a man's home, or his family. "There are always laws," Rhea said quietly, moving to stir the fire. "But there are also ways through them. We will face this together." "How?" Manuel demanded. "What defense do we have against his papers and his soldiers?" "Faith," Rhea answered simply, "and each other." She began setting out bowls for their evening meal, her movements deliberately calm. "Come eat. We need clear heads to plan." They gathered around the table, but the usual comfortable silence had turned heavy with tension. Eli pushed his food around without eating, darting nervous glances between the adults. Manuel's spoon scraped against his bowl with barely controlled anger, while Rhea's quiet prayer went unanswered by her usual amen. Outside, snow continued to fall, adding another layer of white to the darkening valley. The wind picked up, rattling the cabin's shutters like warning knocks, carrying winter's bite in its voice. Inside, the family sat close together, their fears unspoken but shared, watching shadows dance across walls that might soon no longer be theirs to shelter. Beneath dawn brought no comfort to the mountain homestead. Gray clouds hung low over the peaks, heavy with the promise of more snow. Rhea stood at the cabin window, watching her breath fog the glass as she kneaded bread dough with practiced motions. The familiar task did little to calm her racing heart. The thunder of hooves shattered the morning quiet. Eli dropped the kindling he had been stacking and pressed against her skirts, his thin frame trembling. Through the frost-touched pane, they watched 6 soldiers approach on horseback, their blue uniforms stark against the patchy snow. Clive Hartwell rode at their head. Looking entirely too pleased with himself, Manuel burst through the cabin door, rifle in hand, but froze as the soldiers smoothly drew their weapons. "Put it down, McCord," Hartwell called out, his voice carrying clear and cold in the mountain air. "Make this easy on yourself. Ain't done nothing wrong," Manuel growled, but his hands tightened on the rifle stock. "We have orders." The lead soldier dismounted, snow crunching beneath his boots. He pulled a paper from his coat. "You are charged with fraud against the United States government and the kidnapping of a minor child." "That is a lie." Rhea's voice rang out as she stepped onto the porch, Eli still clutching her skirts. "Manuel has given this boy nothing but kindness and shelter." Hartwell's smile never wavered. "The law sees otherwise. Mrs. McCord, if that is indeed your name, without proper documentation, your claims hold no weight." Two soldiers moved forward, their spurs jingling in the tense silence. Manuel's eyes met Ria's, and something passed between them, a moment of desperate understanding. Slowly, he set the rifle down. No. Eli broke free from Ria, running to Manuel. "Pa, don't let them." Manuel's weathered hand settled on the boy's shoulder. "Stay strong," he murmured. "Mind Ria. I will return." The soldiers seized Manuel's arms roughly, binding his wrists with rope. Ria held herself straight and tall, though her heart felt ready to shatter as they hauled him toward a waiting horse. Snow began to fall, fat flakes that melted on her cheeks, mixing with tears she refused to let fall. "Your week to vacate still stands," Hartwell reminded her, touching his hat in mock courtesy. "I suggest you use it wisely." They forced Manuel onto a horse, and Ria had to grab Eli to keep him from running after them. Together, they watched the group disappear down the snowy road toward town, Manuel's broad shoulders growing smaller until the swirling snow swallowed him completely. The cabin felt hollow that evening, like a body without its heart. Ria moved through the familiar tasks, feeding the livestock, bringing in wood, preparing their simple supper. But everything felt wrong without Manuel's steady presence. The fire seemed unable to warm the space properly. Despite her careful tending, Eli sat huddled in Manuel's chair by the hearth, his young face drawn with worry. He had barely touched his bowl of beans, pushing them around listlessly with his spoon. "Will they hurt him?" he whispered finally, his voice small in the tuck-quiet cabin. Ria crossed to him, pulling him close against her side. "Your PA is strong," she said firmly, though her own voice shook. "He will endure." "But what if they send me back to Mr. Turner?" Tears spilled down Eli's cheeks. "What if they make us leave? Listen to me." Ria knelt before him, taking his thin hands in hers. Firelight caught the tears in her own eyes, but her voice grew stronger. "We must not despair. The Lord tests us so we may grow in faith. Manuel needs us to be strong now, to believe in him and in each other." Eli nodded, pressing his face against her shoulder. She held him close, humming the hymn that had first touched Manuel's hardened heart. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering their tracks, erasing all sign of the morning's violence. Miles away, in the town jail, Manuel paced his narrow cell like a caged wolf. The stone walls seemed to press in around him, colder than any mountain night. His wrists were raw from the ropes. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the ache in his chest. He had thought himself immune to loneliness after his first wife's death, had convinced himself that solitude was safer than caring. But now the emptiness crashed over him like a flooding river. He could still feel Eli's desperate grip on his coat, still see Ria standing straight and proud despite her fear. The family he had never meant to find, now torn from him by a man's greed and the uncaring machinery of law. The jail's single window showed only falling snow and gathering darkness. Manuel slumped onto the hard bench, his spirit bending under the weight of separation. The sound of his breathing echoed off stone walls, a hollow reminder of how quickly a man could lose everything that mattered. Days stretched like molasses in winter. Ria walked the half-mile into town each morning, a basket of fresh bread and dried meat tucked under her arm. The jail sat squat and gray on the edge of Main Street, its barred windows staring out like hollow eyes. The deputy knew her now, nodding as she approached. He would unlock the heavy door, letting her step into the dim corridor where Manuel's cell waited at the end. The first time she had come, Manuel had turned away, shame written in the set of his shoulders. But now he moved to the bars eagerly, his rough hands reaching through to touch hers. "The animals are fed," she would whisper, passing him fresh biscuits through the iron bars. "Eli tends the fire, just as you showed him." Her quiet words filled the cold space between them, carrying warmth like embers from their hearth. "You should leave," Manuel would argue, his voice hoarse. "Take the boy. Find somewhere safe." But Ria would only shake her head, her quiet strength unchanged. "This is our home now. We will not abandon you." After leaving the jail, Ria made her way to the white-painted church on the hill. The preacher was often there reviewing his sermon notes or tending to the small garden that supplied his table. Today she found him pulling winter weeds, his clerical collar stark against his worn jacket. "Reverend," she called softly, "might I speak with you?" He straightened, brushing dirt from his knees. "Sister Ria, come inside where it's warmer." In his small study, Rhea sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I need you to understand," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "When Manuel offered marriage at the station that day, it was not mere convenience. We both knew what it meant before God." The preacher listened as she described their life together, the shared work, the quiet prayers, the way Manuel had opened his heart to both her and Eli through the window. They could hear townsfolk passing, their conversations drifting up like smoke. Some call it a sham. A woman's voice carried clearly, "An Amish girl, and that wild mountain man." But another voice answered, "Did you see her at service last Sunday?" Head high, despite their whispers. And him beside her, trying to sing the hymns, the preacher rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "There are those who remember how Manuel was after his first wife died, how he withdrew from all fellowship. Yet since you came," he paused, considering, "I have seen a change in him, a softening. We may lack proper papers." Rhea acknowledged, "But our commitment before God is true." As Rhea spoke with the preacher, back at the cabin, Eli paced restlessly. The walls seemed to close in without Manuel's presence. As dusk gathered, he slipped out into the yard, needing to move, to do something. His feet carried him to the wagon where Rhea's few possessions still lay. Her small satchel caught his eye. He had never seen her open it. Guilt pricked at him as he lifted the worn leather flap, but desperation drove him forward inside. He found a few pieces of clothing carefully folded, and beneath them, a thick Bible bound in black leather. Its pages were worn smooth with use, marked with pressed flowers and careful notes in Rhea's neat hand. As he turned the pages, a loose sheet fell out by the fading light. Eli read words written in Rhea's careful script. "I, Rhea Yoder, do solemnly vow before God to take Manuel McCord as my husband, to honor him in faith and love, to build a home of peace and grace until death parts us, written and sealed this 20th day of October, 1878. Below her signature was Manuel's own rough mark. Witnessed by the date of their meeting at the station, Eli's hands trembled as he held the paper. Here was proof, not for the courts perhaps, but for God and community, that their marriage was real and true. He tucked the paper carefully in his jacket. The courthouse would open in the morning, and though he was just a boy, he knew this testimony might help sway those who held Manuel's fate in their hands. Tomorrow, he would find a way to make them listen. Looking back at the cabin, Eli saw Rhea's shadow moving behind the curtains, keeping the home fire burning. His heart swelled with love for this makeshift family that had claimed him. Manuel's gruff kindness, Rhea's steady faith, they had given him what the blacksmith's cruel apprenticeship never could: a true home. The evening star appeared above the mountain peaks, bright and unwavering. Eli touched the paper through his jacket, feeling its promise against his heart. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight, hope flickered like their cabin's lamplight in the gathering dark. The courthouse loomed against the morning sky, its wooden steps creaking under the weight of townsfolk gathering for the trial. Inside, oil lamps cast flickering shadows across the pine-paneled walls as Manuel stood before the judge, iron shackles binding his wrists. Clive Hartwell moved like a snake through the crowd, his boots clicking on the wooden floor. Papers rustled in his hands as he approached the bench, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Behind him, 2 soldiers stood at attention, their blue uniforms stark against the wooden walls. "Your Honor," Hartwell began, his voice carrying to the farthest corner of the packed chamber, "I present affidavits proving this man's crimes." He laid the documents before the judge with a flourish. "The boy Eli is legally bound to apprenticeship with Master Blake, the blacksmith, and the woman," he turned to gesture at Rhea, seated quietly in the front row, "is nothing more than a dependent lacking proper papers or standing." Manuel's shoulders slumped as Hartwell continued. "This supposed marriage is a clear attempt to defraud the railroad of rightful land claims. We demand the boy be returned to his master, the woman remanded to proper authorities, and the land seized as specified by law." Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through dry grass. The judge peered down at Manuel over his spectacles. "What say you to these charges?" Before Manuel could speak, the courthouse door burst open with a bang. Eli rushed down the center aisle, his boots leaving muddy prints on the floor. In his arms, he clutched Rhea's worn Bible like a shield. He called out, pushing past Hartwell to reach Manuel. The boy's face was flushed from running, his eyes bright with purpose. He pressed the Bible into Manuel's shackled hands. "Show them, Pa. Show them the truth." A murmur rose from the crowd. The judge rapped his gavel sharply. "Young man, this is a court of law. What is the meaning of this disruption?" Rhea stood slowly, her plain dress and white cap a stark contrast to the fine clothes of the townswomen. Though her hands trembled slightly, her voice rang clear and strong through the chamber. "Your Honor, if I may speak?" The judge nodded, and Rhea stepped forward to stand beside Manuel. Her shoulder brushed his arm, and he felt strength flow from her steady presence. "I chose this man," she declared, her words carrying to every corner of the hushed room. "When I stepped off that train with nothing but my faith and this Bible, Manuel McCord offered me not just shelter, but a true home. He has shown me nothing but respect and honor." She took the Bible from Manuel's hands, her fingers gentle as she opened it to where a loose paper lay pressed between the pages. "I wrote this vow the day we met, and Manuel marked it as witness. Before God and this community, I declare, I am his wife, and he is my family." The paper trembled in her hands as she read. "Rhea Yoder, do solemnly vow before God to take Manuel McCord as my husband, to honor him in faith and love, to build a home of peace and grace, until death parts us." Gasps echoed through the chamber. The judge leaned forward, adjusting his spectacles. "Bring me that document." The bailiff carried the Bible and paper to the bench. As the judge examined them, Hartwell stepped forward, his face dark with anger. "Your Honor, a private scribbling proves nothing in law. It proves everything about intent," Rhea interrupted, her quiet voice cutting through his protests. "The law may demand papers and licenses, but God sees the heart. Manuel has given me and Eli a home built on respect and care that is worth more than any railroad's gold." Eli pressed close to Manuel's side, his small hand finding his adoptive father's calloused fingers. "Please, Your Honor," the boy pleaded, "don't send me back to the blacksmith. Manuel and Rhea, they're my true family now." The courthouse fell silent as the judge studied the Bible's pages, his fingers tracing the careful script of Rhea's vow. The morning light streamed through the high windows, dust motes dancing in the golden beams. Manuel stood straighter. As they waited for the judge's word, the soldiers shifted uneasily, their rifles gleaming in the lamplight. Hartwell's face had gone pale with barely contained fury, but Rhea kept her eyes forward, her faith as steady as the mountains themselves. The judge finally looked up, his gaze moving from the Bible to the unlikely family standing before him, the rough mountain man, the gentle Amish woman, and the fierce-eyed boy who had brought them proof of love's truth. The judge adjusted his wire-rimmed spectacles, studying Rhea's handwritten vow. Sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. The crowd held its breath, waiting. Even the soldiers stood motionless, their rifles gleaming in the morning light. "Master Blake," the judge called suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. "Step forward." The blacksmith shuffled to the front, twisting his leather cap in calloused hands. His eyes darted between Hartwell and the floor. "These papers claim the boy was legally bound to your service, yet I see no proper apprenticeship contract. Explain yourself." Blake's face reddened. He opened his mouth, closed it, then glanced desperately at Hartwell. "Your Honor," Hartwell interrupted smoothly, "the paperwork is merely delayed in processing silence." The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "I'm asking Master Blake." The blacksmith's shoulders slumped. "There weren't no proper papers, Your Honor," he muttered. "Hartwell said he'd make it right if I signed the affidavit. Said the railroad would pay good money to clear that mountain land." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Hartwell's face went stark white. "And did the railroad pay you, Master Blake?" The judge pressed. $5. Blake admitted, shame coloring his voice. "Hartwell gave me $5 to claim the boy and sign the paper." The judge's expression hardened. He shuffled through Hartwell's documents, pulling out another sheet. "And these witnesses to fraud, were they also paid for their signatures?" Hartwell stepped forward, his composure cracking. "Your Honor," I protest. "Deputies," the judge commanded, "take Mr. Hartwell into custody. We'll be having a separate trial about attempted bribery and false testimony." The soldiers moved forward, but their rifles now pointed at Hartwell instead of Manuel. One deputy stepped up with iron shackles, the same ones that had bound Manuel's wrists moments before. As for this case, the judge continued, lifting Rhea's Bible, I find no fraud here, only honest people trying to make a home in hard country." He nodded to the bailiff. "Remove Mr. McCord's restraints." The iron shackles fell away from Manuel's wrists with a heavy clank. He rubbed the reddened skin, hardly daring to believe it was over. Beside him, Eli bounced on his toes, grinning widely. Furthermore, the judge declared, "I recognize the marriage of Manuel McCord and Rhea Yoder McCord as legal and binding under territorial law. Their homestead claim stands valid." He fixed Hartwell with a stern glare as the deputies led him away. "The railroad will need to find its route elsewhere." Manuel didn't wait another moment. With 2 long strides, he gathered Rhea and Eli into his arms. Rhea pressed her face against his chest, her quiet tears dampening his shirt. Eli squirmed between them, his small arms trying to encircle them both. The courtroom's mood shifted like spring wind melting winter ice. Where there had been whispers of scandal, now came murmurs of approval. Several women dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Even the preacher, standing near the back, nodded in satisfaction. "Much obliged." "Your Honor," Manuel said gruffly, his voice thick with emotion. For seeing the truth of things, the judge smiled slightly, closing Rhea's Bible with care. "Truth has a way of coming to light, Mr. McCord. Take good care of your family." As they turned to leave, townspeople who had previously avoided their eyes now offered small smiles and nods of respect. The preacher's wife stepped forward to squeeze Rhea's hand. "Welcome to our community, Mrs. McCord," she said warmly. "We'd be blessed to have you join our sewing circle." They emerged from the courthouse into crisp mountain air. The morning snow had stopped, leaving the streets sparkling white and clean. Manuel breathed deeply, savoring his freedom. Eli darted ahead, scooping up a handful of snow. "Pama, look," he called, the names falling naturally from his lips as he shaped a snowball. Rhea's hand found Manuel's, her fingers twining with his. "God has blessed us," she said softly. Manuel squeezed her hand, watching Eli play in the snow. Around them, townsfolk paused in their daily tasks, watching the small family with new eyes. Where once they had seen scandal, now they witnessed something rare and precious. Love forged in hardship, faith proven in trial. "Reckon he has at that," Manuel agreed. He touched the Bible Rhea clutched to her chest with her free hand. "Your vow, you wrote that the very first day." Rhea nodded. "I knew in my heart it was right, even then." Together. They walked through the fresh snow toward their wagon, Eli running circles around them. Their footprints marked the path man, woman, and child, 3 separate trails joining into one. Leading home, the wagon wheels crunched through fresh snow as Manuel guided them home. The late afternoon sun casting long shadows through the pines. Eli huddled between them on the seat, his small frame warm against their sides. The cabin came into view, smoke still rising from the chimney where they had banked the morning's fire. Inside, Rhea moved straight to the hearth, stoking the embers back to life. The familiar scent of pine smoke filled the air as warmth slowly returned to the room. Manuel stood in the doorway, watching her. This woman who had arrived with nothing but faith, who had transformed his lonely shelter into something more. His boots scraped against the rough floorboards as he crossed to where she knelt. The weight of all that had happened, all they had faced together, pressed upon his heart until he could no longer stand. His knees met the floor beside her. "Rhea," he said, his voice rough with emotion. His calloused hands found hers among the kindling. "That day at the station, I said I needed a wife." He swallowed hard, struggling to find words that could hold the depth of his feeling. "But God gave me more than I asked for, more than I ever thought I deserved. He gave me a wife, a son, and a real home." Tears gleamed in Rhea's eyes, catching the firelight. She reached out, touching his weathered cheek with gentle fingers. "Stand up, husband," she whispered, rising and drawing him to his feet. "God gives according to his wisdom, not our deserving." Eli darted past them, arms full of split wood. "The fire needs feeding," he declared, carefully placing logs, just as Manuel had taught him. The flames caught quickly, casting dancing light across their faces. The sound of wagon wheels outside drew their attention. Through the window, they saw several townspeople approaching through the gathering dusk. Some carried baskets or blankets, their faces uncertain but determined. Rhea opened the door to find Mrs. Peterson, the preacher's wife, standing at the front of the group. "We've brought some things," she said softly, offering a covered basket, and apologies if you'll hear them. Behind her, others nodded. Shifting on their feet, Mr. Turner, the general store owner, held up a sack of flour. "Credit's good at my store now, McCord," he said gruffly. "Should have been all along." Rhea accepted each offering with quiet grace, thanking them by name. Manuel stood beside her, his initial stiffness slowly giving way to cautious welcome. The cabin filled with neighbors, their voices mixing with the crack of the fire and the clink of tin cups as Rhea served coffee. Lamplight spilled from the windows into the darkening evening, and inside, the walls that had known such loneliness now echoed with conversation and the tentative sounds of community being restored. Eli darted between adults, proudly showing off the improvements they had made to the cabin, his face glowing with belonging. Manuel watched it all from his corner, feeling the change in his home like spring after winter. When Rhea caught his eye from across the room, her smile held all the warmth of heaven. Winter settled deep into the mountain valley, draping the cabin in hushed white. Inside, the hearth crackled with warmth as Manuel sat in his carved chair, showing Eli how to hold the whittling knife just so. "Steady now," Manuel guided, his rough hands adjusting the boy's grip on the wooden block. "Let the blade do the work." Shavings curled away as Eli's tongue poked out in concentration, trying to shape the pine into something recognizable near the window. Rhea's needle flashed in the firelight as she mended one of Manuel's worn shirts. The familiar rhythm of her stitching mixed with the pop of burning wood and the soft scrape of Eli's knife. Rising from her work, Rhea retrieved a small oil lamp from the shelf. With careful movements, she trimmed the wick and lit it from the hearth flame. Manuel watched as she placed it deliberately in the window, its gentle light reaching out into the gathering darkness. "What's that for?" Eli asked, pausing in his whittling. "So any lost soul might find their way," Rhea answered softly. "As I once did." Manuel stood, crossing to where she stood. His calloused fingers found hers, rough palm against smooth. Together they gazed at the lamp's flame, remembering that day at the train station when desperation had led to destiny. Eli abandoned his carving, to lean against them both, fitting perfectly between them. Outside, wind whispered through pine boughs and rattled the eaves. But its lonely song held no power here anymore. A hymn rose unbidden from Rhea's lips, one she had sung in her old life. But now Manuel's deep voice joined her tentatively, and Eli's clear notes wove between them. Their laughter mingled with the melody as Manuel stumbled over unfamiliar words. The lamp's glow spilled across the snow, a beacon of welcome in the vast frontier night, promising shelter to any who might wander past. But inside, three hearts that had once been lost beat together, having found their truest home in each other. If you believe stories can heal, lift, and connect us, this channel is for you. Thanks for being here. Hit subscribe, and I'll meet you again tomorrow with something real.